In progress, by the way? Ah, yes, it is. I see the
sir,
recording symbol. There we go. I love when I see that symbol. Okay, everyone, good afternoon, and welcome to the symposium that is entitled Fostering a Mentoring Culture at R1 Universities. My name is Joel Ducoste, and I am the Associate Dean for Faculty Advancement in the College of Engineering. I am delighted to have four wonderful speakers that will discuss different aspects of mentoring during our afternoon session. The way the afternoon will proceed is that I will introduce our speakers, allow them to share their wisdom for about 30 minutes, and then we will move to a question and answer phase following each presentation. After the two presentations of two of our speakers, we will then have a 10-minute break and then proceed with our final remaining two speakers. Now, I know you're not here to hear me listen, hear me speak. So let's get right to it. So our first speaker is Dr. Laura Lunsford. Dr. Lunsford is Professor of Psychology and Assistant Dean at Campbell University. A U.S. Fulbright Scholar, she is an expert on mentoring and leadership. She has published over 50 peer-reviewed articles, chapters, and books on mentoring and leadership development, including the definitive Mentor's Guide, 5 Steps to Start an Effective Mentoring Program, which is in its second edition. She has presented on mentoring and leadership at conferences sponsored by the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, American Psychological Association, Association for Psychological Science, American Educational Research Association, among others. She has received many federal grants to support her research, and in 2009, she was honored with the International Mentoring Association Dissertation Award. Welcome, Laura, and please take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is mentoring. And my task, or what Joel tasked me with, is to talk some about the science of mentorship. And that's what I'm hoping to share some with you today. Here's some of the goals. I want you just to have a better sense about the definitions of mentoring, areas of strong and weak evidence related to mentoring relationships, and have a better sense maybe of some of the individual and organizational supports. Being a psychologist, I always like to kind of read the room a little bit. So I wonder if you can just kind of put in the chat just a T or F on some of these questions. So just your first instinct, there's better mentoring outcomes if people are matched on demographic characteristics like gender or ethnicity. You can just pop that right in the chat. Okay, most people are true. Number 2, got some falses. Formal mentoring in programs, that is, has better outcomes than informal or naturally occurring mentoring. True or false? T or F? Okay, a little bit more, a little split there. All right. How about number 3? It is difficult to identify the exact behaviors. True or false in mentoring? All right, most people are false. Got a 1 true. You guys are great on your, okay, number 4, some people, like faculty members or staff, just aren't cut out to be mentors. True or false? Okay, a little bit more split on that one. How about number 5? Most people just exit bad mentoring relationships with no negative repercussions. True or false? All right, some unanimity there on false. And number 6, everyone is mentorable. True or false? Okay, interesting, lots of truths. And number 7, mentoring is mostly a one-on-one relationship. True or false? Okay, a little bit split. So I like to kind of ask these questions to kind of get a sense of your thinking about it, and also to kind of line that up with what some of the research says. I'm going to share first things that we know and are pretty confident about in terms of the evidence. And a lot of this work is also going to be drawn from the science of effective mentorship. One of my colleagues on this report is here. Juan, I'm so happy to see you here. And so I want to make you aware of this report if you're not aware of it, because there's incredible resources, including an online portal that also has access to a lot of practical information about the science of mentorship. This committee was a 2-year consensus committee, and it really focused on the science of mentorship in STEM. The second M is medicine. Although many of the things I'm going to share with you today would apply even to disciplines not in STEM. So there are some universals. Again, here's some of the folks on there, and Juan's picture is up there. He's always getting cool awards, so he'll jump in. There's some information about informal versus formal mentorship, meaning mentoring often occurs just naturally. People kind of get together because they connect on shared interests, and the evidence is that it is found to be more effective. However, formal mentoring is when we use organizational resources to support it. You could argue that doctoral supervisors are in some of these semi-structured relationships. There are expectations about it. There's also actual programs where people apply and are matched. The research suggests that effective formal mentoring is as successful as informal, but the key is on effective. There are many, many ineffective mentoring programs. So it is really key to distinguish the difference between the two. And our consensus committee spent 2 years on this topic. There's lots of definitions about mentorship or mentoring in the literature, and this is in part responsible for some of the mixed findings we have about it. And I'm proud that National Academy Committee said, hey, we think we know enough to really put out there a definition. And here it is. I'm not going to read it to you other than to point out a couple of elements. One is that it's a working alliance. Both people are involved in it, and even if it's required, it's voluntary. And it occurs over time, so even if people are assigned in these relationships, it takes some time sometimes for those to emerge. And critically, it's also defined by career and psychosocial support, because people often have lots of ideas about what's the difference between mentoring and coaching and peer mentoring and reverse mentoring and executive coaching and on and on. If you just provide career support, we might call those people supervisors, in educational settings, maybe even doctoral advisors. The psychosocial support is more like the confidence building, friend kind of support. We have a word for if you only do that, we call them friends. It's the combination of the two things that makes mentorship special. And thinking a little bit about what that means in your areas, and people having a shared understanding about mentoring is really what's critical. And I think this definition is a good place to start. Again, this is just showing that more clearly what these two types of functions are. So they really need to be involved in mentoring relationships. This psychosocial support is really about role modeling, guiding and inculcating values and attitudes about the profession, and that there's some deep level similarity. And so deep level is what we can't see. It's people's working styles, their values, how they proceed. And it also helps mentees see themselves as future academics or STEM professionals or professionals in whatever field that the mentoring is going on in. The career support is different. This is really about helping mentees think about where their place is in the profession. So it's about thinking about goals, understanding all the unwritten rules about a profession. You should go to this conference, not this one. These are the better research questions than these. So really sort of thinking about some of that skill development and also at times sponsorship. So actually actively recommending people to other people in their network or for opportunities. So as you kind of dive down into what mentoring is, I think it's really effective to understand there are a set of behaviors, and this is a good list of them. And that's what mentors should be doing if they're involved in those kinds of relationships. I don't want to overcomplicate you with this psychology model other than to say, again, we see the important inputs. Some of it is that deep level similarity around values and interests. And those processes, by engaging, instrumental is the same as career, engaging in those kinds of support, then that increases that relationship quality that results in the outputs we want, whether they're behavioral, aspirational, getting jobs, promotions, et cetera. The other question is mentoring taking place? So I've worked with many, many programs where people say, yes, we have mentoring going on here. And I just want to point out some research that I've done that shows graduate students as an illustrative example. This could also be true for undergraduates, faculty members. In the case of graduate students, they've ranked it as number 2 on the list for things of their support. And this data was collected from advanced doctoral students, both at NC State University and University of Arizona. And yet, over half of these senior advanced doctoral students felt their advisor is a mentor. 18% actually said no, they're not at all. So that's almost 20%. And 25% were really neutral about it. So we also want to be careful about assuming that it's taking place just because you know, people are saying, well, we have these programs, or people are getting connected. Beyond one-on-one, it is true that we have relationships kind of with a person at a time, but we also know for mentoring, especially because of our career fields today are no longer so hierarchical. You don't stay in the same place often for your entire career. And so these other forms are also quite common and are studied in the literature. So the dyad model is our traditional notion of mentoring, but there's also triads. This might occur, for example, where you have a doctoral advisor and a postdoc and a newer graduate student, so they could be working together, or graduate student with undergraduate and a faculty mentor. Group mentoring, so there's lots of versions of that. Often it'll have one or two mentors working with a group of mentees, and there also could be a network. So the mentee has multiple people. So I just would say the research is really clear that just focusing on one relationship, people need more than that, and really supporting them to develop that and understand there's different ways that can be done is really important. Mentoring is also a process. So in addition to those behaviors, and it has stages that again line up very well with different behaviors that we know are part of mentoring. And I've put a little acronym here, ICE. So it kind of captures, there's different models. There's one model that says 4 stages, another says 5. But these are the main categories. You got to start that relationship initiation. And this is when building rapport and trust and setting goals is really critical. The middle stage is really around cultivation. And so this is when people are collaborating on shared projects, confidence building, reflection, revisiting those goals. So the meat of that relationship. And often what's neglected, but we know it's quite important, is the ending. So how do you wrap up and move on, especially for formal relationships? Informal, it might happen a little bit more naturally, like stay in touch with me, or here's how I'd like to stay in your network. So just realizing that this does evolve over time like other relationships. We also know that there are some pretty predictable sources of dysfunction, and EB and colleagues has identified 5 of those, and it ranges from manipulation, which is less frequent. This is when people steal other people's ideas and pass them off as their own, or otherwise undermine individuals, all the way to neglect. And neglect is really more about you miss meetings, or maybe you take phone calls when you're meeting with each other. And this could be on either side, mentees or mentors. Mismatch and neglect are the most common sources of dysfunction. Mismatch refers to I'm expecting something and you don't seem to have that skill and ability, or vice versa. A mentor might be expecting that a mentee comes in with certain competencies and skills and they do not. Of course, lack of expertise is really not having expertise in the area or domain around which this mentoring should be taking place. And then don't forget general dysfunction. So things happen, hurricanes happen, bad things sometimes happen to people, and there's reasons they cannot be involved. And so the message here that people have talked about in the literature is recognizing there are these sources so you can reduce them and get people rematched and supported if things aren't going well. And knowing that this is also sort of a normal and expected part of what's going to happen at times with mentorship. We also know from the literature that STEM identity and identity in general is really important. So the report we did around STEM talked about these ideas, but it's really true, especially for underrepresented students in any domains. So as you can see here, I've defined identity. I'm not going to read that to you, but it's relevant to address issues of underrepresentation. And it relates to sense of belonging, like I belong here and I can see myself as having a future in this profession. It doesn't mean the touchy-feely, we have to be best friends and I have to know everything about you, but it does mean that you recognize what's important to the other individuals, and the research is really clear about that. Here are some things that are as clear as mud. So we know quite a bit less about matching. So when we have programs, whether formal or informal, the research findings are actually quite mixed about similarity. So some of you put true, like it's good to have some similarity on gender or ethnicity. So when we talk about these surface characteristics, which is how the literature talks about them in terms of ethnicity, race, gender, age, things we can see, the quantitative research finds there are no differences. So there's no differences in outcomes, whether that's measured as promotion, performance, job aspirations, et cetera, on having a match on these qualities. Yet, and that research says it's the deep level characteristics. So those things we can't see, attitudes, values, goals, and that's where it's really important. However, the qualitative research suggests it's really important. And so my interpretation of this research is that when we qualitatively talk to people about the importance of identity, race, gender, that sometimes if it is important and it's not working, they might not stay in those relationships long enough to be in the quantitative studies, because those studies are looking for outcomes, like you stayed together and did it improve it. So my interpretation is maybe they're exiting them at a greater rate, and that those aspects of identity aren't equally important to people. So thinking a little bit about what is important and what's important for what you're trying to achieve on mentoring, it would be a key message here. But assuming that matching on gender or ethnicity is the way to go would be incorrect according to the literature. Another question is mentoring built in or even preferred more in some disciplines? There's some suggestion that some disciplines have more mentoring support built in. For example, big lab kinds of sciences. So even if the faculty mentor is not that great, there's other people to kind of pick up the slack because there's lots of people available. Other disciplines are very solitary. English, for example, some branches of mathematics, and you're much more dependent on one person. And if it's not going well, it could really be problematic. So there's some suggestion that some disciplines might have more supports that buffer against negative experiences. It's also really not clear if everyone is mentorable. I know that this is a controversial point. Recently, I was in Israel at the European American Talent Development Summit, and we talked a lot about this question. I often come at mentoring from a talent development perspective. And that work says that, you know what, mentors they're selecting mentees who are really talented. And so we kind of need to think about what stage people are in that talent development. Are they just learning to fall in love with the subject? Maybe there is more opportunity for mentorability, but as you move up the pike, mentors are actually pretty selective, and we can think about if people are coachable or not. It's easy for us to think about that in a sporting analogy, and we can definitely see some people are able to take guidance more easily and are more responsive to that. And there's some suggestion that that may be true for mentoring. Does that mean that everyone can't be developed? No, it just means that maybe there's other ways that people access professional development and learn about their areas, and maybe these more deep mentoring relationships that also involve some of that psychosocial support aren't for everyone. My read on the literature is it looks like it's somewhere between 15 to 20% of people at any given time. Like if you look at people in programs, and this is across disciplines, accounting, psychology, engineering, they aren't opting in actually for some reason. And some of that might be some dysfunction and negative experiences, but some of it might just be they don't see the value, or the timing isn't right, or there's some personality factors involved. Another question is, does desire for mentoring vary by STEM discipline? It might also be true in other disciplines. I've been looking for data recently from NSF and others about this, because there is a sense that some people want mentoring more in certain disciplines. So it's a little bit unclear, might someone's disciplinary preference influence the extent to which they want to participate, or how widely available different kinds of mentoring opportunities are. And what about the right length of time for a mentoring relationship? The literature is fairly unclear about that. We know that informal relationships tend to last longer, but formal relationships can be, I've seen successful programs that are 6 weeks, some are years. So it's a really unclear, I think we don't know enough yet about the right length of time, and probably it depends on what the goals are of the individuals in that mentoring. And is there mentoring personality? Are there some traits that just make people a little bit more receptive for being involved, such as openness, for example? A researcher out of Greece has done some research in this area and found, for example, it's the extroverted and introverted people who tend to have more mentors, and the people in the middle are less likely to be involved in those mentoring relationships. Some of that research has not been replicated, but there is some suggestion from folks like that there might be, but we don't know enough yet to make strong claims. So looking back at the questions that I mentioned at the beginning, I just showed you sort of my read on these answers, which is number one, quantitative research has its faults and qualitative says it's true. And formal mentoring does have better outcomes, but only if effectiveness, I mean, it's true that informal is better, but if we don't include program effectiveness. It is totally false. We're pretty clear now about the behaviors involved in mentoring, and it's important people are familiar with those. And it's probably true that some faculty members or staff or others aren't all cut out to be mentors, just like some people are better teachers or scholars. It's a bit unreasonable to expect everyone for some reason is going to be great mentors when we don't expect that in other areas. Most people just exit bad mentoring relationships. That's probably false. There are often reputational consequences for doing that. So there's some evidence that people tend to kind of stick it out and they can have more negative outcomes, leave their chosen profession or major. Everyone is mentorable. We just talked about that. And mentoring is one-on-one because we're interacting one-on-one at a time, but it might be in different contexts. So there might be times we're in group mentoring or have multiple mentorship relationships. Now I'm a fast-talking Southerner, so I'm going to pause for a second and move into the last part of what I'm going to share, which are mentorship supports. Mentorship is a skill that can be improved. And there is an important place in the role of mentorship education. The National Research Mentoring Network, I've listed the link here. They have a lot of resources. They first started really focusing on the biomedical workforce, but many of their resources would apply more broadly to many majors and domains. And it's a free resource. I highly recommend it to you if you're not familiar with it. They have education opportunities online from undergraduates all the way up to faculty members. There are also professional organizations with competency frameworks for what we should be expecting to occur in mentoring relationships. And here's the two most prominent ones, the International Mentoring Association based out of the United States and the European Mentoring and Coaching Council based out of Europe. This, for example, there are 8 competencies in the EMCC, the European one, and I've listed them here. And you can see there's things about understanding self and reflection, enabling insights. There's some tools that people are expected to have, and being able to have your own self and group evaluation about how the relationship is going. Some other tools at the relationship level are also on that National Academy's portal, and they involve things like individual development plans, mentoring compacts, also tools for self-evaluation and reflection, and milestones that we might expect in mentoring relationships. At the organizational level, and a lot of this comes out of the work with the National Academies, and also other research suggests there needs to be a shared definition of mentorship for organizations like NC State to make some progress on having a mentoring culture. When people misunderstand, that's when you have misaligned expectations and can run into trouble. So having a shared understanding of that. And having a place for some structured feedback at all levels. So the individuals are doing some feedback, but also at the maybe department or unit, like how's it going, how many opportunities, where there's some difficulties and we might need to help people gracefully exit or rematch or retool some skills. And having some institutional accountability structures. For example, Lois Zachary has written a great deal on hallmarks of mentoring. So we have some very clear hallmarks about what a mentoring culture, a mentoring organization looks like, and rating, places like NC State or your individual departments and colleges can be a really helpful area to see where more supports are needed. Of course, recognizing and rewarding effective mentoring, and part of the work you're doing now this afternoon is kind of understanding more about it. And quite importantly, mitigating negative mentoring experiences. These can be quite derailing, especially for underrepresented mentees, and really make them leave majors and domains. So thinking carefully about when it might not go well and how can we support those individuals, and having guidance to help institutionalize mentoring and normalize it. It's just part of what we do here. And even if we don't have these deep mentoring conversations, we can have mentor-like interactions. A colleague, Belle Rose Ragan, talks about them as mentoring episodes. And that leaders influence and resource mentoring programs. Certainly, I've talked with many institutions who kind of want to, we want to do more about mentoring, but we really don't have resources for that. That just signals there's not a commitment. It does involve some resources, especially around education and these institutional supports and structures and evaluation. I am going to conclude my comments here. I think we can make available the PowerPoint because it has the bibliography and some of the resources as well. And as Joel mentioned, I think, yep, I listed it here for programs. I think most libraries have it. It really is a step-by-step evidence-based way to kind of think through official mentoring programs. So I will open it for any comments or questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm going to take moderator prerogative and ask the first one, and then we'll open it up to the floor. I know people are begging to ask questions. So you did mention about, the concerns about bad mentoring. And, my question is, sometimes that happens, whether it be by accident or unfortunately by, lack of care. Can you suggest anything that, may help to buffer the mentee can recover from such an experience so that it doesn't lead to a dramatic change by the mentee making a drastic change in direction because of that? Is there anything there?
Sure, and I would say three things about that. One is partly there should also be some mentorship education for mentees, and to know, hey, sometimes this happens, and these would be the sources, so they can recognize it early. Because I often have talked with mentees, and they think if they stick it out, it'll somehow get better, and almost never does it get better. So just having some education about that, so they can also be their own advocates. The second is, even great mentors have bad days. So there's a difference between, having an off day or saying something that maybe shouldn't have been said or giving some feedback in a way, and genuinely, a pattern of neglect or dysfunction. So there is a difference there. And the difference then is having some supports, for example, for graduate students, having the graduate program coordinator perhaps be the go-to person who they can speak to confidentially to, and kind of talk through that. Is this a bad mentoring? Do I need to be figuring this out, or is it just a bad day? Some schools like NC State have ombudsmen, and they also will be available to serve in that role to sometimes just provide some coaching, because I think that's really what it's about, is to help the person sort of understand if it's not working out. And frankly, it can go both ways. So I've done a lot of mentoring triage for faculty members who feel they have very dysfunctional graduate students. Without naming names, in some areas where you work with animals, it's a real problem if somebody is doing things that seem undermining. So it can go both ways. Now, obviously, your question is about people exiting, so it'd be more the mentee, but it can be really tough for mentors too. So get education, and then having someone who they can, check in with and get some coaching about what's going on, and rematch if necessary.
Okay.
Laura, just a follow-up. This is Jeff Joins. I agree with what you said. The problem is that a lot of our students special their own stipends, right? And so they don't want to leave that mentor because that means they won't be able to eat or sleep. So it's a real problem if there's a tremendous poor mentor-mentee. And it could be both ways. The mentee could be a poor mentee, right? And as well as the mentor being poor. And I think it goes back to Joel's questions, what kind of things can we help mitigate or help the two of them without undermining the mentor's situation and not making it like the mentee's problem and they'll want to get fired. because they're worried about, not being able to eat and sleep.
Well, and this is also really true for international students, who there's real consequences if it's not going well and now they can't be on their visa, and they don't even have that kind of flexibility. So I think that's a really important role of mentorship education, because usually these problems around communication and not being able to communicate well about what's happening, that's not always the case, but often there's some communication issues going there. And so to the extent to which they can be identified and people can be supported to improve their communication and align expectations, often it can help mitigate some of that.
Real quick, just so if you're ready to ask a question, please raise your hand. So I want to make sure that we get as many and go in that order until time is up. John? Yeah, John.
Thank you. I want to follow up with what Joel and Jeff just said and emphasize the difference between an advisor and a mentor. As you pointed out, not all faculty are good mentors. They might be an advisor, and they might be a great advisor in a lab and get through a great program, but the program is more than the research. And as a director of graduate programs, I emphasize to all new students that they should seek out other mentors. So at least there's a triad model or even group. I offer myself as somebody to talk to. Not everybody can do that. Not all DGPs can do that. But that also, if we have effective communication up front with expectations that are clear, that can help that process as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Don Chandler and myself have both, and Kathy Cram have done research on these networks. And there are real tools to help people kind of think through who their board of advisors should be, what are their goals, who do they know who can support them, and it helps them identify, I want to learn how to write a grant and I don't know anyone can really do so. How can we connect that person with someone else in their network to do that? So yes, encouraging this notion that not one person is going to give you all you need also helps sort of adjust and align some of those expectations. Someone put in the chat a question about peer mentoring in terms of its effectiveness. The research says actually that peer mentors have to really be coached on providing any career support. So they are much more likely to provide that psychosocial kind of confidence building support. So if there's an expectation that some career support might also need to be happening, they really need to be educated about that, because otherwise they don't tend to do it. And you can imagine where this might be important in a graduate setting, for example. So it can be really effective, but I've also found that just because you have people in groups, at first I thought, well, they would know to be their own supports. They don't. You have to tell them, like, hey, this is peer mentoring, and educate them a little bit about what that means. Are you talking, Joel? I can't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, I'm surprised nobody said you're on mute, but it was going to happen sooner or later. Thanks for catching that question in the chat. Rudra, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the talk, very informative. I had a question about the effectiveness. So one of the early slides said that effective formal mentoring can be as as effective or as successful. So in terms of effectiveness or success, how typically does one measure or determine or track that for an ongoing, say, an organization or a unit that's trying to improve its mentoring? How would one know if different formal practices being put into place or being changed are having a positive effect, especially with looking at student mentoring, but also, peer mentoring of faculty, for example, senior to junior faculty. It's not a lot of instances of, you can't say of the 100 people mentored by this person, so many have turned up, because it might not be hundreds or even dozens. So anything that goes across the board in terms of approach in determining effectiveness of mentoring? Thanks.
That's a great question, and I'm glad you're thinking about mentoring effectiveness, because that really is the key. We spend a lot of time in those relationships, and if it's not moving the needle or helping people get somewhere they wouldn't get, like, why bother? So I would recommend that National Academy's portal, because it has some evidence-based surveys and tools for that. And I would say it really varies by the goal. And this is where people often don't think about it. Like, they just dive in and start doing mentoring and, like, did it work? Well, it depends. What was your goal for that? And so, for graduate students, we could imagine time towards degree, first job, satisfaction with program. For faculty members, it might be publications, intent to stay in their position, or success for going up for tenure. So the goals are going to be different, but there is a lot of work that people have done to do evaluation work. And in fact, the book I mentioned that I wrote lays out how to think about that. So, but being really clear about the goal, and then making sure they're doing those activities. And then there are categories of outcomes that we know tie to mentoring program. And the other thing I'll add is attitudes are the fastest to change. So certainly having an attitudinal measure, because behaviors take longer. So you can ask, like, their intent to go to graduate school, or stay in the major, or do a grant, or go up for tenure in a timely fashion, or whatever that is. So I would certainly recommend having an attitudinal measure.
Awesome.
Thank you.
We have time for one more burning question. Is there anybody? Do you have any more in the chat? Doesn't look like it.
I had
all right then. Well, let's. Oh wait, I'm sorry, Anna.
It was earlier in the chat. I asked if bad mentoring experience is always the fault of the mentor, or this is more of a two-way issue. It's not always a bad match, I think, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. I wanted to hear your opinion about that.
Well, it depends on the kind of bad mentoring. So there's a book I want to write called Tour Mentors. It's just nobody wants me to have their name on those experiences. So there are genuinely times when the mentor, we could speculate why, but they do things that it's clearly problematic. And that's usually around manipulation and taking credit for ideas that aren't theirs, et cetera. So there are times when it's completely the mentor. But most of the time, it probably is both individuals. So there's some mismatch in expectation or problem in communication. It typically emerges early. And then people make these judgments that are incorrect, and it just sort of goes into this, what I would call, death spiral. So usually there is some shared, but at the same time, the mentors have more power, and that's just how it is. Now, they don't always want to think that, but they have more power in that relationship, and being aware of that, and that it might be hard for mentees to express that things aren't going well is just something that you have to recognize. So we can often sort of blame the mentee, when I would probably want to put a little bit more emphasis on the mentor for being able to recognize and coach and create an environment. Harriet Zuckerman wrote about evocative environments when she studied Nobel laureates, that they create an environment where we can ask questions, we can express things aren't going well, and also learning to ask really great questions. So that's just my personal opinion. I'd put it a little more camp in the mentor, just because of the power differential.
Awesome. Thank you for your questions, everyone. And if you got that reaction button handy, please, let's give a round of applause to Dr. Lunsford for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, then. As we move on, we have our next speaker, and that would be Dr. Juan Gilbert. Dr. Gilbert is the Andrew Banks Family Preeminence Endowed Professor and Chair of the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Department at the University of Florida, where he leads the Computing for Social Good Lab. He is a fellow of the Association of Computing Machinery, a fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science, and a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors. In 2012, Dr. Gilbert received the Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Mathematics, and Engineering from President Barack Obama. He also received the American Association for the American Association A. Nico Herbermann Award. And Dr. Gilbert is a member of the National Academies of Consensus Committees, titled book that Dr. Lunsford mentioned about, which she is also a member of that. Welcome, Juan, and thank you very much for joining us and giving a presentation. So take it away.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed my friends' talk, Laura. I think it was John and Jeff asked a question. I wanted to answer that question before I got started as well, about graduate students and the issue of when mentoring falls short and they're afraid of what happens. I had that same issue happen in my department, and we created a policy whereby if there is a breakup between the advisor and the advisee, we give the student funding on the department for a year to transition to someone else. And so that has been a tremendous asset in supporting our students and giving them the benefit to have confidence in their endeavors and to pursue more fertile ground where necessary for their research and their personal development. Okay, so let me begin. Let's see. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about mutual mentoring. What I'm going to do is start with some definitions, and I want to give some context from a personal perspective, my journey, and some mentoring. And then I'll talk about mutual mentoring strategies. I'll point out some examples, and I'm going to talk about benefits, and then we could do some Q&A. So Laura had this in her presentation, and it's here in mine. This was a very important consensus study that we did. And again, just like Laura, I encourage everyone to go get this and look at it. It's very, very useful. It's a great resource, and I'll talk from this as well. The first definition comes the definition of mentoring, and this comes from our report. And I'll point out to you that in this definition, and Laura had this as well, notice that it's between a more experienced and less experienced individual. And we talk about intentionality, responsiveness, reciprocity, trust, and then shared responsibility. And it's in interactions between a relationship. So this was the definition we use for mentoring. If you look at the definition for mutual mentoring, there are multiple out there. This is the one I prefer. Dealing with a non-hierarchical developmental relationship based upon mutual reciprocity between two individuals. So what does that mean? Well, that means both parties act as mentor and mentee throughout the relationship. And you're going to recognize that you learn from each other. Now, mentoring is, and Laura mentioned this as well, it's commonly thought to be mentor-mentee with this unidirectional learning and sharing strategy. The more experienced person sharing, teaching, guiding, advising the less experienced person. Now, this is what's seen as typical mentoring, and mutual mentoring, again, is beneficial in both directions. So the question is, how do you establish a culture of mutual mentoring? How do you get there? So let me give a little bit about my background, my personal experience. In the left-hand corner there, you'll see a picture of my hometown, Hamilton, Ohio. So I was the first in my family to go to college. I went to Miami University, as you see there, which is very close, about 30 minutes from Hamilton, less. And I was the third of 4 children. I have a younger sister, 2 older brothers. And again, my parents did not go to college. My dad had an 8th grade education. My mother did graduate from high school. So I went to college as a chemistry major. And my freshman year, I took advanced chemistry, and I did it very well in there. So well that one day a TA pulled me aside and said, "Juan, you're really good at chemistry. You're going to do well here at Miami. You'll graduate. you'll go to graduate school, then you'll do, and I said, wait a minute. Wait, go where? He said, go to graduate school. That's what we do in chemistry. I said, I got to go to school again? I thought I went to college to get a job. Well, I didn't have a mentor to tell me what college was about. I didn't know anything about graduate school. So I ended up changing my major to systems analysis or computer science because I knew I could get a job when I graduated. And I ended up working and winning a scholarship from NCR Corporation in Dayton, Ohio. And it was my junior year. The dean of the college was teaching a class. And he told me, he pulled me aside. He said, Juan, you know what? I think you'd be a good professor someday. And it was not until that moment that it ever occurred to me that I could be a professor. I'd never seen an African-American professor in engineering or computer science. So I ended up going to graduate school at University of Cincinnati. I got my PhD and started my career at Auburn. And then I went to Clemson, and now I'm at the University of Florida, which I'll talk about those experiences. So I wanted to give a little context about myself personally as I go through this. This was my advisor, Dr. Hahn, for my PhD. That's actually on graduation day there at the University of Cincinnati. Now, when I was in the PhD program, and I'll talk more about that in a second, but to my knowledge, I was not involved in any mutual mentoring through my entire PhD program. In fact, I had no idea what it was or anything. No one ever talked about it. It wasn't until I became a professor that I understood mutual mentoring. And as a professor, things changed with respect to mutual mentoring for me. So I went through this graduate program, not seeing anyone like myself, never having a mentor like myself, had an advisor, not understanding mutual mentoring. And I almost left the graduate program until I ran into an African-American woman who told me, don't leave. And I ended up staying and finishing. So upon graduation and becoming a professor, I decided that I was going to mentor my students based on education experiences from my colleagues. So again, I was in graduate school. I was the only African-American in the PhD program, severe isolation, but I had friends who were in the PhD program across campus, and some of them were in a college of education studying underrepresentation in STEM. And so I had an opportunity to learn through those experiences, interacting with them about mentoring more so and science of mentoring. So from those experiences and the research my colleagues were doing, I learned about mutual mentoring, and I started doing this and benefiting from it. And I'll talk about that. So strategies. Mutual mentoring doesn't require a formal designation. You just do it. In fact, in places that it is happening, I would argue they probably don't even know what it means and know that it's happening. This is how I suggest it begins. It begins with simple things such as asking your mentees, how are you doing? That seems overly simplified, but it is not. It's more than just career and education advising. Again, Laura pointed to this in her presentation. By the way, Laura and I did not coordinate these presentations. It just happened this way. The psychosocial support. We talked about that in our report, and that is critical. You want to develop and mentor the entire person. And this is how you begin as a strategy for developing a mutual mentor relationship. Family matters. Have you met your mentees' families? Do you ask about them? Do they know about you? This has mutual benefits, and it's important for multiple reasons, but it goes back to that psychosocial aspect as well. And this is another aspect of hobbies, understanding more about your mentee than just the science that they're looking to get involved in. And again, these conversations begin this bidirectional relationship, sharing both ways, and it establishes trust. When you get into mutual mentoring, you will grow and develop, and it happens in an interesting way that professionally and socially you benefit. So with my students, I tell them, you realize that once you get your PhD, I am forever your advisor. And they kind of giggle, and then some of them become professors. And when they submit an NSF grant, they have to say who their advisor was. And so 10 years later, submitting proposals, and they're still associated with me, and they say, oh, I understand now. And so this relationship doesn't just end. And I would say, piggybacking again on what Laura was saying about when mentoring ends, I would say that if it's mutual mentoring, it never ends. It's a continuation indefinitely. Now, the mentee, through these kind of strategies, will develop, again, mentioned necessary trust and confidence in you to be successful. Now, this is critical for students from underrepresented groups. When you, like myself, entering a program where you may be the first in your family, the only one, and you've never seen anyone like you doing this, you have to develop trust and confidence in your advisor and mentors. And this form of mutual mentoring opens the door for that. And I will say, again, touching on some things questions that came up, mutual mentoring is a one-to-one relationship, but I'm not saying that's the only form of mentoring. What I would say is I'm only talking about that form, meaning mutual mentoring. There was questions about peer mentoring and having more than one mentor. In our report, I often mention about work that we have done in my lab where we looked at having more than multiple mentors, and we refer to it as a constellation of mentors. That constellation is what you really need and you benefit from. Now, within that constellation, you can have mutual mentoring occurring with those individuals. And if you want to talk about that, we can. Again, you're establishing a this mentoring relationship, and you become a colleague for life. It develops lifelong relationships that benefit both. And let's talk about some examples. So again, I started my career at Auburn. I was there from 2000 to 2009. I moved up the ranks from assistant to full professor. This is a shot of some of my students from Auburn. Everyone in this picture got their PhD with me except one. And I had have a mutual mentoring relationship with all of them. Here's some more of my mentees that came out of Auburn, which I established these kind of relationships with. And then in 2009, I moved to Clemson, where I became a chair, and I was there through 2014. Now, this was a new dynamic because I had administrative responsibilities, which allowed me still to do mentoring with my students and establish mutual mentoring relationships as well. But there again, we grew the lab, and in this context, we became the largest PhD program in computer science with African-American PhD students in the nation. In 2014, I was recruited to University of Florida. 2015, I became department chair. That move there was interesting because we moved 5 faculty, 2 postdocs, and 20 PhD students to the University of Florida. So let me talk about some of these examples. Vince Cross got his PhD with me at Auburn. He is currently a senior research scientist at Charles River Analytics. Vince is a collaborator on an NSF grant with me. It's a $5 million grant proposal. When Vince was in the PhD program, Vince is from Philadelphia. He moved to Alabama. He actually did his undergrad at Miami University as well. So we had that in common. But we were able to establish a relationship. He became a father near the end of his PhD program. And so there were mutual exchanges between myself, his family, and Vince during the program. And till this day, we're still connected and collaborating. Kenneth Gaucher got his PhD with me at Clemson. He is an endowed professor at Morehouse College and just became the director of a center there. And now he's the PI of a National Institute for Mentoring Blacks in Computing, which I am a co-PI on that project with him. So Kenneth is originally from Georgia. And again, we connected through the PhD program. And Kenneth had interesting leadership capabilities that were ahead of his time. In other words, he wanted to lead as a professor almost way before he finished. And so there were some things I learned in managing Kenneth that helped me manage other students in the future. Chris Crawford got his PhD with me here at the University of Florida. He is a professor at University of Alabama. He just recently won an NSF Career Award. And Chris was doing work on brain-computer interfaces. And along with that, he had a friend, Marvin Andujar, who also got his PhD with me at University of Florida, who is now a professor at University of South Florida. And the two of them had this weird idea to work with brain-computer interfaces, which are things that you could put on your head and use it to control devices with your thoughts. And I learned a great deal from them, so much so that we created a brain drone race. Yes, we did. We flew drones with our thoughts, and you can go to braindronerace.com and see the videos. You all are at NC State, so R1 institution like University of Florida in the Southeast that likes football. The year of I want to say it was 2015 when we did the brain drone race. That was the #1 media story at the University of Florida. We were more popular than football. So I learned a great deal in interacting with my students and allowing them to train me or mentor me in new areas and new things. And it was a mutual beneficial thing from both of them. Naja Mack is a more recent graduate. She's at Morgan State now. And Naja is a real fascinating story. When she was in the PhD program, Naja became a mother. So what was interesting was when Naja found out that she was pregnant, she told the other ladies in the lab, and she told them she was going to tell me. And it was weird because they were all following me around to see, what is he going to say? What is he going to do? How's he going to react? How's this going to go down? So long story short, Naja was a mother and had a daughter the last 2 years of her PhD program. And again, we established a mutual mentoring relationship where we shared as parents. And now she's an assistant professor at Morgan State, and we're collaborating on a grant proposal together. I don't know if Laura's still here, but Laura will know this one. Jeremy Waysome got her PhD in 2017 at the University of Florida, but not with me. Jeremy did her PhD in civil engineering, but she had an interest in engineering education, and I picked her up as a postdoc on a project that I had. When we did the National Academy's report, Jeremy worked with me on that and got very close to the other members of the committee. So this is a good example. I think someone was asking about having more than one mentor. She became active on the report, and till this day, she still engages with members of the report. She just, about 2 months ago, was up at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, with a member of the report. So she was able to establish this constellation of mentors through the report. And we developed, again, a mutual mentoring relationship. And the story here is that Jeremy wanted to do engineering education, and her interest was around mentoring. And Jeremy and I have worked on some research where we identified for the first time that, and no one knew this until we wrote a paper about it, it was the best paper award, that 50% of the African Americans who enter a PhD program in computer science don't finish. And that no one knew that. And so we had an opportunity to collaborate on that and some other work. And then Jeremy became a mother. Her daughter is Amara Rain, and she named me the godfather, her and her husband. So again, a mutual beneficial relationship, establishing these with mentees. And I could go on and on with stories from all of them. Now, benefits. I have learned research from them. Again, the brain-computer interface. When you establish a mutual mentoring relationship, you are open to learning from your mentee, not only about them and their personal, the psychosocial aspects and things like that, but also their ideas, their innovation, the research that they are interested in as well. I have learned how to be a better mentor for future students because of mutual mentoring. And this is generational shifts that occur. I've noticed this, and it wasn't something I had planned for, but I've been doing this since, wow, the year 2000. So over 20 years, and students are different. They've changed over time. And because of these mutual mentoring relationships, I'm better prepared to deal with these shifts than I've seen with my colleagues. As I mentioned several times, I have lifelong relationships with these mentees. They're lifelong friends and colleagues now. And because of our efforts, we had the opportunity to go to the White House and visit the President of the United States. So I'll stop there and take questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Juan. And that was a great photo. I hope you have it blown up somewhere and put in your office, because I would if I had that shot.
Look above my shoulder.
That's not big enough, man. I'm sorry.
I know.
It would have been the size of a huge poster, greater than, anything imaginable, but that's wonderful. So let me stop there, because I know people are asking and begging for questions, but I'm going to take the first question as a moderator prerogative. So you talk about the relationship and the strength of that and building that, but are there any concerns about how far and deep does that relationship go, and worrisome about any lines being crossed and the potential for that? So I just throw that out there just as a curiosity about that.
Definitely. You have to be aware of that, and you have to keep the relationship professional and understand that some people could misunderstand what the relationship's about. But yes, you have to be concerned with that. However, from my experience, again, mutual mentoring is not a term that is understood by many people. And when it happens, they don't know that they're engaging in such a relationship. But you have to be aware of it and act appropriately.
I am muted. I got it before somebody said it. So if you have a question, please either put it in the chat, I'll try to catch it, or raise your hand and I will acknowledge and allow Juan to answer your questions. Anybody out there? Okay, I see Saeed, please. Unmute yourself, Saeed. You might be asking a question, but you're still muted. Yeah. There you go.
Sorry about that. Thank you for the great talk, Juan. I'm a PhD student at NC State, and yeah, I guess I was kind of curious just from my own knowledge and moving forward in academia. I wonder, are there any difficulties or limitations you've found through navigating with so many mentors? I guess, are there any difficulties in how many mentors that you work with, or anything that you, I guess, would change, or things that you've thought about in that realm? I guess I'm curious.
Well, excellent question. Yes, I do have a capacity. My students think I've never reached it, but there is such a thing as a capacity limit. But someone had asked about peer mentoring earlier. I have a structured way of mentoring my students where I establish a mutual mentoring relationship with them, but I spend most of my time with the rookies and the people, the seniors. And then there is peer mentoring that occurs in the middle where people collaboratively work together and share information forwards and backwards. And that's something that, Saeed, I like to say, I wish I thought of it and take credit for it, but I really can't. And Saeed, I'll tell you how I discovered this form of mentoring. I don't know if Laura's still here, but this is a research experiment I did as a graduate student.
No,
Remember
she's not,
when,
just quickly, just to let you know, she had to step away.
Okay. When I was a PhD student, I was the only African-American in the PhD program. I never met another African-American PhD student in computer science. And it was a hard program for me. And I remember being in class and I looked around in my lab and I said, you know, I'm the only African-American here. And this is PhD program kicking my butt. But my colleagues in the lab make this thing look easy. How do they do that? You know, in particular, they were all from India and China primarily. And I thought, how do they do that, especially Chinese students? So Joel, I went and hung out with them. And I made a discovery. I discovered that there were at least 2 of them at every stage of the PhD program. And they shared information forwards and backwards. When a student from China had accepted to be a PhD student in that program, they had what I call footprints in the sand. From the time they landed in Cincinnati, got off that plane, all the way through the university to the stage of being hooded. They knew what classes to take, who to take them with, where to live, where to eat, everything. And I said, is this strategic? Are they doing that on purpose? And I looked around the nation. To this day, I could not find an example of a PhD program that had a single Chinese student in it. There were always at least 2 at every stage. So Saeed, all I did was replicate that model with a different demographic. And guess what? It worked. They share information, they work together. So the person who asked about peer mentoring, it worked. And so I would say to you, you have to determine what your capacity is and how you can do this personally with your students. You may or may not be able to replicate what I did, but I'm sharing with you my story and sharing with you what I observed amongst students and how they operated in the PhD program to be successful.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you.
Awesome. Let me get a question in the chat and then I'll acknowledge you, Maria. Just let me get this question from Anna. You told us about your many successes with mentoring. In your experience, is everyone mentorable, or did you also have some failures with students quitting or changing paths despite your efforts?
Yeah, I would say I didn't have students quit. I had students exit. And there's a difference. Quitting implies failure, that they couldn't finish. And I had them exit for other reasons. I just had a student who left the PhD program, African-American female. She left with a master's degree because she wanted to work and do science and technology policy. She got a fellowship in DC and she left the PhD program to pursue that because she didn't need it anymore. So that's an example. I can't think of anyone that quit. It was more of exiting and pursuing other options. Now, is everyone mentorable? I would argue yes. And what I mean by that, it is a match. Sometimes you may not be the best match to mentor an individual, but that doesn't make them in a situation where they can't be mentored. And there are people who will deny that they ever been mentored, but if you listen to their story, they receive mentoring even if they don't acknowledge it. It's very hard to climb the ladder without solely and not have any mentoring at all.
Cool. Thank you. Maria?
Thank you, Joel. Juan, thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I was wondering if you realize that you have a combination of personal characteristics that are really naturally inclined towards mentoring, right? You appear to be a very curious person, not just scientifically curious, but curious about others, which would lead you to want to know more about them. And then you also appear to be so humble, especially in the way that you are downplaying the enormous size of what you've been able to accomplish with helping all these people, right? So sometimes I feel like we need to look at examples like that to look at those qualities and see how do we enhance those qualities in people who may not have them naturally. Going back to our previous speaker, is everybody capable of being a good mentor? Maybe if they're not, they could learn that these are things that could be useful, right? So have you ever tried to kind of help others to become better mentors by maybe sharing some of those qualities? And if you did, what was the result of that?
Well, Maria, thank you so much. And absolutely, have I shared them? That's all I do. So let me answer a couple of those questions. First, I still say that everyone can be a mentor. And the whole premise of our study was, notice the title, The Science of Effective Mentoring. The purpose in having that title was to say that you can do it. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's going to be the best at it, but it can be done. Okay, so there's some level. Now, in my case, do I share that? Absolutely. I mentioned one of my mentees, Kenneth Gaucher. He's a professor and endowed chair now at Morehouse. Kenneth is the top producer of African-American men in computer science PhD programs. So we have that relationship where these things happen. And so, so I'll give you one of my tips on how you asked me, do I share this with others? Let me tell you how I actually do it. So I told you I do it. Let me give you some concrete ways that I've actually done that. In order to be a member of my lab, number one, we interview everyone. And we is myself and my lab members. So we welcome people to the lab and we tell them that they're going to be interviewed by lab members. So when someone joins the lab, they know they were welcomed by their fellow lab members. They wanted them there. The other thing I do is in lab meetings, we do talk about research projects and we talk about diversity, we talk about representation and the impacts of that. And I tell my students that if you get your PhD and you become a professor and you don't mentor or at least try to help someone else, in particular, someone from underrepresented group, woman or something, then what have you done with me? What was the purpose? Now, I haven't had to pursue anybody along those lines because they all have done exceptionally well at that. And the reason they do that is because they see the benefits of having a diverse environment. They see the benefits of mentoring others and how they receive mentoring. Remember my organization. I spend most of my time with the rookies and the people on the way out. The ones in the middle work together. And I never recruit just one. They always come in at least two. Remember the Chinese students. So I use that model. When they come in, they're in class together. They have a cohort, a member that they're working with. So this mentoring, this relationship is built into their research training. In my lab, students work on 3 things at a time. Joel, they work on their stuff, my stuff, meaning their stuff is their dissertation topic. They have to find their own topic. I don't give a topic. I want them to find their thing. They work on my stuff, which is a class project, projects in the lab. And then they work on more of my stuff, which is another project. So students have to lead a project in the lab, and they have to be a team member in a lab. So I'm training them along these lines of being collaborators, mentors, and leaders, because I don't know everyone's background here, but I would bet all of you have been in an interview and asked this question. Can you tell me an example of where you demonstrated leadership? And the next question, Joel, are you a good collaborator? It's built into the training and how they are. So Maria, that's how I get them to that point where naturally when they come out, they have these traits of leadership and knowing how to collaborate and mentoring and understanding that they benefited from these things.
The team relationship that you have built, it's incredible how you have designed it, because that's a family. You created really a family. And that's a structure I think most of the, faculty are not really creating. And they don't have to be as, well, I mean, I know some families are dysfunctional and all that, but putting that aside, the point is that way you've built that community, that small community, it is wonderful to see. And it almost, I mean, I know you probably heard about the clustering hiring that's being done to try to bring in groups of people in there, but you pretty much built a small microcosm of cluster recruiting for graduate students, if I were to use the same phrase that's being used out there, and doing it on that microcosm. Well, let me get to another question that's in the chat from Anna. How do you encourage and inspire your mentees to work hard? How do you teach them to take ownership of their projects?
The first question is easy. How do I teach them to work hard? They see examples of it in the lab, and they understand that's what's required from day one. I never tell them this experience will be easy. I tell them it's actually going to be challenging, but you will not be alone. And I haven't had any issues with effort in working on projects. As far as them take ownership of their projects, that's required. Remember, everyone's required to work on 3 things: their stuff, my stuff, and more of my stuff. They have to lead one of my projects. And so that's part of their training, that they take leadership. And so that part, they find their own thing, their passion. So I like to say this about my goal as far as inspiring my students. I want them to find, for example, their own dissertation topic. And the reason I do that is because I want them to own it. It's theirs, not mine. And what I want them to do is, I call it, Joe, you're going to love this. It's called the video game effect. Some of you may have kids, and if you ever saw kids playing a video game and you say, well, okay, little Johnny or Jenny, it's time to go. And you've been playing that game for an hour. And they say, I just started. If you could get your graduate students to work on research like a video game, meaning they spent hours on it and feel like they just started, that's no longer work. That's a passion. That's love. That's ownership of what they're doing. That's the behavior we want in the ownership of these projects. You want them to work on their research in a way that they own it, in a way that they're passionate about it. So it's like a video game. Time goes by and they have no idea how long they've been working on it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Juan, I greatly appreciate your presentation, your storytelling. And I think, like everybody else, I want to hit that reaction button and just say, absolutely, thank you, and wonderful for sharing that. So, okay, well, my brain juices are flowing. I can't even know where to stop, but we do have to take a break. Well, I need to take a break. And so we will return at 2:30 with our next two wonderful speakers. So please do not go away. Come back, and 2:30, we'll kick it off again. All right, take care and be back at 2:30. Hey, Chris.
Joel, I'm
hey,
here.
Amanda.
Yeah.
Yep, saw you. Awesome.
And I gave you, made you co-host, Christina. So Christine.
Hi.
Bye.
Good. How are you?
Bye.
Do you want to temporarily stop recording and then restart?
Yep.
Or, yep.
Sounds like a good idea, Dr. Ducoste.
Of chemical engineers. She has been a member and continues to be a member of our faculty for over 33 years? Wow, I didn't know that much time has passed, Christine, and served as the inaugural Associate Dean for Faculty Advancement. For decades, she has been recognized for broadening participation, promotion, and retention of underrepresented minorities and women in STEM. Among her many recognitions include the AAAS Mentor Award, the NSF Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Mathematics, Engineering, and Mentoring, Brown Engineering Alumni Medal, and the William W. Grimes Award for Excellence in Chemical Engineering, amongst her many awards. She has also been active as a PI on multiple NSF advanced grants and has served on several advisory boards for advanced schools. And she is also the co-editor of the book, Success Strategies from Women in STEM, A Portable Mentor. Christine, it's so wonderful to have you, and I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, everyone. It's so great to see so many of you I haven't seen in a long time. And, you know, it's funny because we had something for women in engineering at NC State a couple of weeks ago. And I saw people, because I've been on loan to NSF for a couple of years. And I said, oh, I'm going in my third year at NSF. They said, really, we didn't even know you were gone. So anyway, you know, I call it COVID. I call it, you know, whatever. So anyway, it's good to see you all. I want to call everybody's name because I know so many of you, but I won't. So let me go ahead and get started. Joel, how much time do I have? 2 hours?
You got 2 hours. Yeah, I know you could speak for more than that,
okay.
but you got 30 minutes and then 10 minutes for questions. Yeah.
Let's see what I can do in 30 minutes. So I had a great time preparing this presentation, and Joel was on the first slide there, you'll see. Let's see if I can do my slideshow here. So when we talk about mentoring, you know, mentoring is this really interesting animal. And Joel remembers this picture, right, Joel? This story. So we were at
Absolutely.
a conference. We were at a conference in, it might have been the, what was it? The ERN conference, just pre-COVID, 2020. And Joel ran into these people who knew some people that I knew. They had gone to RPI. And to make a long story short, the woman standing next to Joel and the tall guy standing next to me, we were talking about how they were alumni from RPI, and Joel, of course, did his work at RPI. And so I said, you look familiar. I look familiar. The woman looked familiar to me. So again, long story short, it turns out that after kind of putting two and two together, these two people were my math tutors when I was in high school. Now this is 2020. In high school, they used to get on a bus from RPI and come over to the city of Albany, New York, and meet in the the Urban League building. I was just a little freshman or something. I don't even remember, in high school. And we reconnected, you know, a bunch of years later, and they were still doing the outreach. They were still doing mentoring, still trying to get students to go into careers in STEM. So this is really important work. And when you have an opportunity to go full circle, I won't show you the part where I was crying because it was just really emotional to thank them for mentoring me when I was in high school and hadn't seen them in, I don't know how many years, Joel. We didn't do the math too well, but
yeah, you probably don't want to do the math.
A long time, right? So anyway, that's kind of my intro story. I just added this slide because I was just telling you all where I was. So I'm at HBCU, Historically Black Colleges and Universities Week here in Orlando at Disney. And we have this program called the Future of STEM Scholars Initiative. That is the backbone of it is the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we had a lunch and learn. And so these pictures are fresh. I mean, like obviously got the same jacket on, right? But these were high school students who we were talking to about going into fields in STEM. And they got lunch, and then we talked to them. And the two gentlemen in the picture with me are, one of them is a CEO of a chemical company, and the other is a former CEO of a chemical company. And we have raised about $10 million to provide $40,000 a year scholarships to, I think now upwards of 300 students to go to HBCUs. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm glad that I could join you all today, but the work continues, right? But let me start with a few definitions. And, there are so many different definitions. I'm sure that Juan and others have given you different definitions as well. So we can talk about mentoring relationship mechanisms. You can have assigned mentors where you actually assign someone to be a mentor for someone. Cluster mentoring, I think that Juan was talking about that for the last part of his talk. I know he's done a lot of that. Naturally occurring mentors, relationships that just kind of evolve, and then mentee seeking and mentor seeking, where you actually actively go out and try to find someone to mentor you. I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to weave this talk with some terminology and then kind of my own life, my own experiences, because I think it all kind of fits into why I'm so passionate about this and why this is an important topic. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this mentoring, which was in my title. So my first mentors were my parents. My father, who's still living, was a music teacher. My mother was a science teacher. She was a biology teacher. And yes, I know she doesn't have on safety glasses. For those of you who are working in labs, that was in 1954. She was dissecting a cat. Both of them went to segregated, well, they went to schools where they were like the only Black in the college. My father went to Ithaca College, and when he went to Ithaca, they wouldn't allow Blacks to live on campus. So he had to find a professional Black family in town to live with. My mother was part of a cohort of folks who went to SUNY Albany, where there were only a couple of Black students in the class. And so they were kind of at the forefront of that activity. And that's where I grew up. I grew into that family. That's me sitting on my father's boat with my microscope and going through high school and then college and graduating. And Olga, you'll see your picture. I use that picture all the time, being able to mentor students. But there are a lot of different places where we can provide mentoring. So pre-college programs like Minority Introduction to Engineering, undergraduate initiatives, co-op assignments, undergraduate research projects where we can do mentoring, graduate student support. I had a GEM fellowship and worked for a company, and then faculty support. And then we can do mentoring of faculty as well. So that's me sitting on the couch there. That was my working at GE in upstate New York. I was a GEM fellow there eventually and had mentors. And then there's me. I always tell people it's a younger, thinner, less gray me, but I'm proud of the gray because I guess I earned it. So that was me with my my research advisor. We had quite a diverse group, but so there's this formal mentoring. We'll talk about formal and informal mentoring. And then this is a group of graduate students, minority graduate students in the College of Engineering. So, there have been places where I've been a recipient of mentoring and where I've actually been able to do mentoring. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some terms. Now, obviously, as a faculty member, as a full professor at NC State, I had to do research. So my research program was steeped in surface and interfacial science. So formal mentoring of students in a laboratory, getting them to get their master's and their PhD. This little diagram I use is to talk about this cycle of mentoring and how you can do mentoring at early, different parts of your career. And put some groups together and even mentoring of faculty. And there's Erica. And Erica is now a tenured faculty member in textiles. I'm so excited. She told me that last week when I saw her. So the joy that you get out of seeing your students, your proteges, your mentees, the people that you are influencing to be successful is always really, really exciting. So another definition of mentors, there are different types of mentors. Again, you can probably come up with 10, 20 different terminologies, but one set of mentors would be a peer mentor, someone who can help you learn, who may be just a little bit ahead of you in your career. They can assist you in learning the do's and don'ts of a position. From that position, they're kind of very close to you. So this might be a first-year graduate student being mentored by a second-year graduate student. You can have a career development mentor who may help with short and long range mentoring, and then a personal mentor, someone who helps you in some elements of your life that are more than just the technical or academic aspects of it. Now, I have an opportunity to write a book chapter and some other, well, co-edit a book and then write some book chapters. And so I'm going to give you some information here. But this is actually from, I think it's Lois Zachary, Creating a Mentoring Culture. So we can talk about formal mentoring and informal mentoring. Each one of them have different elements of these 5 aspects. So for formal mentoring, there's finding the mentor partner, the accountability that's in that relationship, the relationship itself, the learning goals, and then the duration. So I'm not going to go through all of these points, but when you're finding a mentor in a formal mentoring, you'll probably will have a facilitated selection. It's voluntary. There's some eligibility requirements. You have to be a faculty member who's been doing this for at least this long, or a graduate student that's been doing this for at least that long. There's accountability. The roles and responsibilities are well defined, and there's a commitment that's required in formal mentoring programs. Some may or may not have mentoring agreements. Again, I'm not stipulating that all of these things have to be in a formal mentoring program, but these are the elements of it. And then there's the relationship. It's a partnership, usually structured with some level of commitment. There's some milestones, ongoing communications. There may be learning goals, because it may be a part of a formal mentoring program like an REU program or something where you have a cohort of graduate students going through something. There may be goals that are regularly evaluated, some developmental goals. And then the duration, usually in a formal mentoring relationship, often the relationship has a finite beginning and a finite end. There may be a time frame or some goals. The relationships are often negotiated. So when I talk about mentoring, of course, the PhD advisor, you're talking about graduate students, there's going to be some mentoring that goes on. However, I like to talk about mentoring that goes on beyond that, because for my case, for students of color or women, a lot of times the mentors are not kind of in that small circle that you're living in, right? So some of you may already know this, but when I started at NC State, I was the first African-American woman and faculty member in the College of Engineering. And I was the only one for 16 years. So I wasn't going to find someone who looked like me to mentor me, right? So the point is that, you know, you sometimes may have to find relationships outside of where you are in that process. So we can do the same thing with informal mentoring. I'm just going to point out some of the differences. Finding a mentoring partner may be voluntary, because it's not mandated that you're going to be in a mentoring program. There's not really eligibility. That doesn't mean that you don't get people that are good, but the chemistry and the accessibility are valued. So you're going to really actually take some time to make sure that you find the right person. There's not necessarily a formal agreement. There's no commitment required, but sometimes accountability is harder to maintain if it's not part of a formal program. The relationship is probably more personal, but not inappropriate. I'm not going to talk about this today, but I talk about sexual harassment and harassment that is not mentoring. We all know that. However, we need to talk about that when we talk about mentoring relationships to make sure that people are in appropriate mentoring relationships. And then the communication may or may not be sporadic. I have mentors who I talk to maybe once a year. The learning goals may be broad, maybe just-in-time goals, something I need to get done that I need some advice on. And then the duration, there's no expectation of the relationship or time frame. So it's not like an REU program or a program that you might have like a building future faculty or preparing the professoriate, a formal mentoring, right? And then the relationships can last forever or be based on situations. So again, formal and informal, these are the general principles. They're not necessarily etched in stone that it has to have all of these things to be one or the other. I believe that the quest for healthy lifelong mentoring requires mentoring in several directions. There's mentoring up to advisors and leadership. We can learn as faculty from our students. Our students can mentor us in the things of the world. I had a student who was from another country that had a different faith base than me, and he taught me about his faith. And I don't mean like he was preaching to me or something, right? But I learned that him coming from where he came from, there were certain traditions and cultural things that I needed to do or not do in interacting with him. And so I learned from him. So he mentored me. There's mentoring down in quotes, because I don't like to, the hierarchy of mentoring is kind of sometimes a little complicated. Mentoring down to students. And then I think there's mentoring across to peers. And I talked a little bit about peer mentoring when I talked about the different types of mentoring. However, you all asked me to talk about something that I actually had to learn a little bit about. Because Juan, we don't know it all, right? We may have our awards and everything, but we don't know everything about mentoring, right? But we do know a lot, and we've experienced a lot. So this concept of distributed mentoring, actually, there are a lot of terms that are used for mentoring that are aligned with things that we know. So when I think about multiple mentors, I think about the yellow dot is a person who is being mentored. So you can have a mentor here and a mentor here, they're just kind of coming in. But if we think about this distributed mentoring as, the dot in the middle, this yellow dot being a person, and they have a set of mentors and they each have a role in their lives. So some people call it, a mentoring board of directors or a constellation of mentors. There are a lot of different things. But distributed mentoring actually has some real defined terms and descriptions. And I'm going to use an article I found on distributed mentoring to describe that to you. So this article on distributed mentoring talked about designing contexts for the collective support of teacher learning, right? So just hang with me for a minute, right? So this article was talking about, gave insights in terms of how expert and peer mentors jointly reinforce or uniquely enhance the knowledge and skills acquired by novice urban teachers, okay? So they talked about two different kinds of mentors. They talked about the expert mentor who demonstrated how theory and research inform classroom practice. Again, we're talking about teacher learning, very specific field. They recommended scholarly resources and modeled evidence-based problem solving. Then there were the peer mentors, and these were people, they were probably peer teachers who validated one another's experiences, shared problem-solving strategies employed by local school personnel, and contributed instructional suggestions based on their own teaching experiences, right? So an expert mentor may have been someone at a college of education, right? Or it might have been somebody in the superintendent level in the school. And then the peer mentors, it might have been a person who was teaching for a short period of time. My mother was like I said, she was a biology teacher in South Carolina, and she lived with a group of women who were teachers, and there were some that were just a little bit ahead of her, and I would consider those peer mentors. So the distributed mentoring model addresses a broad range of knowledge and skills required for successful, move this here, successfully teaching high needs urban high schools. So this was this particular article. So how do we actually translate that into the spaces that we're talking about with the students that we work with? Well, they talked about 3 different ways that mentoring would work, right? So there's a confirmatory contribution is one in which the expert and the peer mentor both address an issue in highly similar ways, right? So similar information. So those are those 2 arrows kind of aligned, right? And then there's the additive, and the additive contribution occurs when one type of mentor raises one issue and expounds about it, and the other type of mentor does not, right? So it's additive. So I tell you one thing, someone else tells you other thing, but they add up to more information. And then there's the complementary contribution is present when an expert and the peer mentors both address an issue, but in different ways. So you get 2 different pieces of information. And I think when I read this article, I thought, oh my goodness, this is a way we can start to talk to our students about how they can interpret the mentoring that they're getting from different people, because it's coming from different places and it's telling them different things. And what does that mean? So I said, let me try to map this into a topic, right? So research and career directions after graduate school. So I am a graduate student, let's say, and I am trying to figure out what I want to do after I graduate, right? So a confirmatory contribution would be somebody saying, well, you probably need to think about doing a postdoc in order to get more experience, says my peer. And then my advisor or someone else in my constellation mentor says, Christine, I think that's a good idea. You should probably think about doing a postdoc, right? An additive contribution would be, well, Christine, you should think about doing 2 postdocs, right? Or you should think about doing this and then doing a postdoc. So it kind of adds on to it. And then the complementary contribution would be, well, you could do a postdoc, says person A. Person B says, no, you definitely shouldn't do a postdoc. You should definitely go straight into industry. or you should go straight into academia, or you should go work in the national labs. So the idea is that the way the information comes in is going to be different. And so I think that teaching our students and us the differences, so that when you send people out to talk to other people and the advice is not the same, you don't have to say, oh no, they're wrong. You can say, oh, this is a complementary contribution, and maybe we can help to filter what you do with that information. Can you have too many mentors? I think so. I think that if you're in a network, this, again, the yellow circle, that's the person that's being mentored. They can manage these relationships. However, you can have too many mentors, right? And then you're just like sitting there and saying, okay, I don't know, there's just too much going on here. So, you know, and I have a lot of mentors. Someone else might be overwhelmed by the number of mentors that I have, but for me, I can handle it. I can manage it and I still have mentors. So I think that this is something else we need to think about as well. For some people, one mentor is going to be just fine. So the benefits of distributing mentoring, you know, for me, even in my role as associate dean, when I was no longer doing active research, when I was no longer in the classroom for the last 12 years, 15 years I haven't been in the classroom. And research, I closed up my research lab about 6 years ago. So, but I was still able to do it. So for those of you who are thinking, well, I don't advise grad students, and I don't have a lab for people to work in, I don't have a research project, there are different things you can do. So what I did was I founded this thing called the mentoring incubator, which I call it. You won't find it online because we didn't have a website, right, Olga? So, but what we did was we got together with students and we said, we're going to teach you about how to receive mentoring and then go work in somebody else's lab. So cross-cultural mentoring for me has been really important. We had a grant from NSF where we did structured mentor training. I think Olga's probably in like all these pictures, right? Because we worked together on this a lot. So we did structured mentor training with Tueri Bowles and a colleague of mine, Andrew Greenberg at Wisconsin. We had a grant to actually do this. So the structured mentor training is where we were talking to postdocs and graduate students about how to mentor undergrads and then how to receive mentoring from their advisors. There's bridge mentoring. We had community college students, in this case, mostly African-American males from a program that was at Wake Tech Community College that Olga was involved in. And so we did that mentoring. And then we coordinated programmatic mentoring by saying, okay, in biomedical engineering, where I had a courtesy appointment, we're going to bring all these students in and teach them about all this stuff. And then we're going to send them out into the labs to do the work. And then they're going to come together. So it's kind of like an REU, but we weren't responsible for the research parts of it. We were responsible for the mentoring. So you can do lots of different things. So I'm going to try to finish up by talking about this science of effective mentorship in STEM. This is a report that came out from the National Academies. I think that Juan was involved with this. I know I saw Juan at one of the fact-finding meetings, and he might have been part of the team that was actually working on the write-up. I know I did a review of the final report, but they put out a consensus study report. And I encourage you all to go and find that. They basically were looking at intentional, inclusive, and effective mentoring relationships for different types of institutions, minority serving institutions, undergraduate only institutions, research intensive institutions. And then they were looking at inclusive practices as also, and then creating inclusive learning practices. Now, the next couple of slides I'm going to show you, got too much information on them, but I'm going to highlight just a couple of things relative to what I thought was this distributed mentoring. So helping our students in R1 institutions, right, to find mentors and understand how to manage those relationships. So this, again, this report has actions for university leadership, a bunch of things they list. I'm going to highlight engage faculty professional development programs and centers in addressing mentorship as part of undergraduate research, training, new faculty orientation, which I know Joel talked about that this year in faculty orientation. So there are ways that the university leadership can help do this, and also to evaluate it and give people kudos for doing it. For department chairs, support rewards and review processes like RPT by addressing mentorship outcomes in annual review, promotion, and tenure. Looking at the quantity and quality. I know at NC State, we've been doing different elements of that as well. For research training and graduate program directors, the one I'm going to highlight here is regular reviews of student process, put things in place within the departments, paying particular attention to the stages of mentorship and equitable access to effective mentorship. And finally, oh no, there's two more. The faculty mentors, working with other faculty within and across institutions, the conversations you all are having here, to extend mentee networks, and understanding that mentees can seek support wherever they can find that, and support them in doing so. So don't get mad, faculty advisor, when your African-American woman goes to another African-American woman in biology or another department to seek mentoring. Don't get upset that you own the student and that, you know, okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox there. So bottom line is, we want to encourage our students to find the right mentoring networks for themselves. And then for graduate students and undergrads, seek multiple mentors to provide diverse forms of support and encourage other students to do so as well. So I invite you to go look at this report. You'll see there's a lot of information in there I'm not going to have time to cover. I wanted to finish up by saying my multiple mentors all over the place. You know, in the middle is my dean, Louis Martin Vega, Marianne Fox. Most people did not know that she was a mentor of mine because she was what I call the silent mentor. People did not know that she was my mentor, and I didn't want people to know. They didn't need to know. She didn't tell them either. So you can have people quietly mentoring you. Harold Freeman was a mentor of mine as a early career faculty member. So the point is that you can have multiple mentors, multidisciplinary mentors. I still have mentors, but I'm not going to tell you all who they are. So you can do leadership. Like Joel said, I'm the president of AICHE, American Institute of Chemical Engineers. We have 60,000 members in 110 countries. And I got mentored by the first woman president of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, by the first African-American fellow, right? So in professional societies, encouraging students or faculty to find those people who can mentor them if they desire to be mentored. And then of course, to celebrate mentoring, I received the Presidential Mentoring Award and the AAAS Mentor Award. But that was because of the work I did at NC State and because my colleagues wrote letters and supported me. My students wrote letters to support me and they celebrated the mentoring. And then writing it up in journal articles or books is also important. As the president of AICHE, I've had an opportunity to create a coaching, mentoring blue ribbon task force to try to see what we're doing in our organization and to try to see what we can do differently and do we need to set some things up. So this is my group from industry and academia. And then finally, FOSSI, what I was just telling you about. We have raised over $10 million to support four-year scholarships for high school students to go to HBCUs, and that's why I am here in that program. So that's been really amazing. So last slide, mentoring structure and the benefits of distributed mentoring. The most important thing is when you see your students or your faculty doing well. So Kiana, I don't know if she's gotten her degree yet, but this was a couple of years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. I saw her, that she was at a Nobuche conference, Organization of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers. I saw that on Facebook the other day. So I've known her since she was in 5th grade when we talked about her doing STEM. And she's about to get her PhD in chemistry from NC State. And then I saw this online this morning. Carl was a student at NC State. I've known him since he was in high school. He's an assistant professor of chemical engineering and doing well. And then Carlos, I knew him since he was a graduate student in chemical engineering, and he's the department chair. So I'm really excited about mentoring, and it's even better when you see your students and folks doing well. So I'll stop there. And I don't know if I have any time for questions. I was looking at my little clock here. And
you got time for questions.
I do. Okay. Okay.
So we designed it right. So awesome, Christine. This is great. Oh, I'm sorry. I cut you off. You were about to say one more thing?
You're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, wonderful. So I'm going to lead off with a question. I'm of the opinion that, you know, graduate students or anybody, to have one mentor just doesn't make sense. I'm just going to throw it out there that mentoring is always distributed. It's a question of how many, I agree. It's a question of how long a duration, you swap in and out and all of this thing. But I just don't hear and I just don't see an argument for just having one mentor ever.
No, I don't either. You know, Joel, I mean, you know, we've talked about this, you know, on several occasions, and, you know, there's your advisor, there's your PhD advisor. he or she is going to be a mentor of sorts. But the type of mentoring I'm talking about is mentoring beyond the mechanics of how you get your research done. It's where do I want to go? Who am I? How do I fit into this place? And you got to have, in my opinion, a constellation of mentors to be able to advise you. And they're not all going to, I have a number of white male mentors, but they couldn't advise me about, okay, when this guy says this, when I walk into a room, you know, some of the things that were unique to women, women issues or women's perspectives, they couldn't help me with. So for me, I was able to kind of put that together. I think you can get overwhelmed though, Joel. I think that you can have too many people giving you advice. And if you don't have the filters or the wherewithal to figure out where that stuff belongs and what perspective that person is coming from, then you won't be able to make decisions based on the advice you're getting.
I know you mentioned that you have probably an overwhelming number that you might not advise anybody to do the same thing. It might be a little bit sensory overload. And other speakers have talked about the dyad, triad, you know, kinds of things. Can you make an argument for an optimal number that you should say stray away from plus or minus of that number? Is it? Can you say that?
I'm going to answer a slightly different question. You need to figure out how effective your mentors and your mentoring networks are, and when you need to modify them. Because if I add up all the mentors I've had over the course of my career, it'd be a lot. But if I add up all the mentors I have now, people I really call for advice, it's probably between 2 to 4, right? But you have to know when to let a mentor go. So, you know, sometimes the mentoring, for example, Ruben Carbonell, y'all know Ruben. Ruben was my mentor when I was an early career faculty member. I consider Ruben now a colleague. So the relationships transition, he loves to tell people how he mentored me. And he did, he really did. But he wouldn't say now that, oh, I'm Christine's mentor. He wouldn't say that now. So I think that the transitions that happen over time and different seasons, like when you're getting ready to find a job as a grad student, graduate, I keep talking about grad students. I know there's other places in time in the academy, but you might have a lot of people giving you advice and they might become your mentors. So I don't know that there's an optimal number. For me, I probably have about 2 to 4 right now.
Okay, very good. All right, questions out there. There's one question in the chat. Let me ask, it's from Anna. How important do you think it is that mentor and mentee come from similar backgrounds? Is it critical that the two have certain common points beyond their passion for science?
I think that it depends, and it depends on how mature the people who are in the mentoring relationship, right? So for example, you know, there is something called culturally competent mentoring, right? And being culturally aware. So if you know that someone is, for example, Native American, right? Somebody who's Native American and you know that there is something regarding how far they're interested in going from their home base, reservation or community or whatever. If you know that is something that's important, then you will be mindful of that when you're making suggestions for what they're going to do. You don't have to be a Native American to do that. You just have to be aware, right? So I think that it depends on the comfort level. For me, I'm comfortable with both, coming from a lot of different perspectives. But yeah, if you don't have a culturally competent or a cultural, or I'm talking about culture, but if you don't have a point of common interest or a point of common background or common identity, you can still be a mentor. However, when you get to a spot where you are in unknown territory, do not fake it, because the people who you're mentoring are going to know that you're just giving them, oh, I can't say that, we're being recorded. Anyway, that you don't have enough information to give them. So that's when this network that you all have here comes into play, where you can say, oh, wait, let me call Christine, or let me call Joel, or let me call Oba, let me call Sharon, let me call Terry, because I can't speak to this issue, and let me get some advice. People call me all the time and say, Christine, I've got an African-American woman that I'm working with, and I'm trying to figure out whether I should talk to her about this, and I'll say, yeah, I mean, that's no big deal. Or I'll say, well, you know, you might want to think about, and you can always refer her to me if there's some issue that you don't feel comfortable with. So I think knowing what your limitations are is really key, but certainly people who have good information and good advice are welcome in a mentoring relationship. You just have to manage it.
Awesome. Okay.
How do you motivate your mentees? I think that's Anna again.
Yep. So her question, how do you motivate your mentees, and do you have a secret formula?
Oh, we could ask Olga. Well, obviously, so I do motivational speaking and workshops and seminars and things. And I tell people in the last few years, I discovered a new word. You ready? Introvert. Because I'm not one.
And so, I am.
I was like, what? They do what? So, you know, I'm not shy. So I'm not, you know, I don't mince words. Not that you have to be an extrovert in order to be a good mentor. I think that really just getting to know them and, you know their personal story and connecting with them personally. And it doesn't always work out. And you have to be able to say, you know what, I don't think this is working too well, or maybe this is not what this person needs from me. Maybe I need to step back a little bit. But I just find getting to know people. I was at an NSF meeting the other day, and it was a PI meeting. I can talk about NSF because I'm at NC State, right? I can't talk about it when I'm whatever. But I was at a PI meeting, and this African-American guy, I said, oh, he had the program, and I said, oh, are you part of it? He said, no, I'm just a AV guy. And I was like, asked some questions. Turned out that he had an electrical engineering degree from Morgan State at HBCU. He knew someone at the meeting, but he was working for the hotel. So I said, wait a minute, I need to connect you with whatever. But so that listening and asking questions and being sensitive to and mindful and caring and authentic with people, I think that they will see that in you, and you can motivate them. But it's got to be a relationship. You got to be in a relationship with people in order to mentor them, or else people aren't going to catch it. Hi, John.
Hi, Christine. Good to see you. Thank you.
Long time, yeah.
I enjoyed your talk and all the others. I would just add about the motivation a little deeper into getting to know them is finding out what that individual wants to do after graduation of whatever degree, right, and how that degree will help them, and then remind them of that when they say it's getting too hard.
Right.
Sometimes it is, and this is the really hard part here, sometimes it is right to step aside and do something else.
Yeah.
But most often it is a matter of confidence and support and stress management. And I just try and not be part of the stress and be part of the management part. But most of the students that have expressed their gratitude to my mentoring are those that I could connect the work here with what they wanted to do and why this degree was important.
Right, John, that's a really good point. You know, I think that we need to be honest that not everybody's going to get their PhD. Not everybody's going to become a professor. Not everybody's going to get tenure. And so if the advice to be really authentic is maybe you should think about X, that's also important. I didn't talk about the difference between mentoring, coaching, advising, encouraging, influencing, supporting, sponsoring. I mean, there's so many different terminologies that we can use, but I think John's point is spot on.
All right, very good. One last question that's out there that wants to be asked?
Terry, Melissa, Sandra.
I know you, Christy.
Juliana. I'm like,
get that
I'm sorry.
there. It's a reunion party. All right.
I know.
Sorry. Joel, can I make one more comment
Good to see you, Christine.
about that?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead. One more final comment. Yeah.
Quick comment, Christine. I heard on a podcast, this is not mine, a struggling student in the lab late at night, PhD student, was told, oh, another dark, cold night on Everest. And the point is, what did you expect? This is going to be hard.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. I mean, there's so many elements of this that are are difficult and challenging to our students. And I think that as long as we can provide support and encouragement to them in an authentic manner, I think that that's really important. I was going to show you something, but I know we don't have time. But I've written during the pandemic, I wrote a couple of poems about the challenges associated with being a graduate student or a postdoc during the pandemic. I won't
read one of your poems. I'll take creative license.
Joel, I know. I've got to find it, and it's
okay.
I got to find it. I don't think it's okay. I think it was in another presentation, but anyway, I think that letting our students know that we are real people and that we have our own challenges as well. I think that it's important for them to understand that about this. Okay, wait a minute. I did find it. Hold on a second. Yeah. Okay. So this is called I Want My New Normal. And think Dr. Seuss. It's true. We are all home, not going to New York or Paris or Rome. My technical conferences are off the table. My research group is barely able to understand what just happened to us. It sometimes feels like we were hit by a bus. Suddenly down, wounded and confused. I can't believe how much energy we use to prepare for a paper that will not be presented. If I am honest, I truly resent it. I'm taking some time to calm myself down and assess what is truly going on. That's right. There's a new way we must behave. For one's own research is for the ones our research is trying to save. It's confusing now, this sudden stop in our scholarly quest in our research shop. The paradigm shift is happening now. It feels so strange. And as I bow to this new research way, all I can say is that discovery in STEM is what we do best. We are resilient and will stand strong with all of the rest.
Awesome, Christine. I just didn't know you were a poet laureate.
Oh, anybody who knows my mom knows that all that jewelry making and everything else I do is just keeps me busy. So anyway.
Well, this has been outstanding. And of course, it goes without saying, hit those reaction buttons, people. This has been wonderful, Christine. This is
Thanks,
fantastic.
everyone.
Thank you
I miss
much.
you all so much. And just keep doing what you're doing. And I just have to say, I could not be more pleased than I am to see Joel in the role that I had as Associate Dean, and to see Sherry and Olga and the whole team working with him, and all of you working with him. So keep giving him all the support he needs, and I'm really excited. So I miss you all. Got another year at least at NSF, but we'll see you at some point.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Christine. Appreciate it. Fantastic.
Thanks.
Okay. This is, I know your brains are being saturated. I hope you can maintain as much of it as possible. And if you cannot, there is a recording to suffice that. So, all right, we still have one more, and it's a very good one that's still remaining. And our final next speaker is going to be presented by Miss Amanda Schneider. I hope I pronounced her name properly. Right? Ms. Schneider is the Director of Content and Communications at Kronos. As director, she is an advocate for using research and storytelling to showcase how human engagement can change employee productivity, advancement, and growth in an organization, elevating the overall employee experience. Prior to Kronos, her work in entrepreneurship and education with the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation provided her with insights into the key factors of workplace today and mentoring, development, inclusion, and support. In pursuit of these elements, she's helped organizations work smarter to retain their employees, learn from one another, and build better pathways forward. Amanda, it's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I am not in the academic space like most of the other presenters, so I will present what I know and hopefully continue to learn from you all as I have over the course of today. I will go ahead and share my screen, which I think I'm only 50% proficient at most of the time in these presentations. So Let me try.
You got it.
Okay, and I'm gonna turn this on. Oops, not that. I'm going to start this. Okay, and hopefully you all can see this opening slide. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I was given the question to present on, can effective mentoring be measured? And I think, although after listening to everyone else present earlier today, I feel like I could just throw up a slide here that says yes, period, and be done. But I think that you all might require a little bit more than that from me. And so I will do my best to kind of dig into this a little bit further. As Joel said, I am Amanda Schneiders, Director of Content and Communications at Cronus, and I spend most of my time figuring out what is going out there in the world of mentoring, both from a research standpoint, thought leadership standpoint, and then what's happening within our programs that we run internally with our customers. As Joel mentioned, I work with Cronus, so we are a SaaS platform that runs mentoring programs for internal mentoring programs for organizations. And this is everything from Fortune 500 companies like Amazon and Facebook to academic institutions like Rutgers and University of Washington to government institutions, Air Force and US Coast Guard to professional associations and nonprofits and all that's in between. So what I'm covering today, kind of going back to, again, what is effective mentoring, 4 principles of measurement as we see it, some examples from clients that we've worked with on how they're measuring their mentoring programs, challenges, and then talk some Q&A. First and foremost, and I'm glad that this piece has come up in a couple different talks today, but the idea of like, what is effective mentoring? And this is sort of our definition of what effective mentoring is. And I know that there was a lot of, there's been a lot of talk around kind of formal and informal mentoring, and there's also been some research around it that kind of says, you know, maybe informal mentoring is more impactful. And I am not refuting that or debunking that, but I think what we see at our principle is that formal mentoring kind of helps all these other aspects of mentoring be a little bit more present. So structure, guidance, training, things that we think are really important for mentoring participants in order to be successful in their connections. So giving people a kind of map or plan to follow, giving them the training in order to have these impactful conversations with their mentor or mentee, just builds this accountability in a formal setting mentoring relationship. Also, by the way, if you hear any like loud noises outside, I'm in Seattle and there's a lot of seaplanes out my window. So just, you know, don't mind them. But basically it also, formalizing a mentoring program also just helps, I think, the reporting and tracking and measurement of it and what we've seen working with customers. So this is kind of our definition of it. Also with formal and informal, you know, what we see is that informal mentoring programs, you know, have been great over time. They've been the organic version of mentoring that has existed for ages and ages. But what we've also seen is that informal settings, you know, people tend to mentor people who look like them. And so that has sort of limited or cut off avenues to other populations and demographics over time who want to be involved in mentoring, but maybe don't feel it's as accessible or open to them. And so formalizing a program, I think, helps to kind of open that door a little broader and really create more of that kind of active recruitment to other demographics who want to be involved in mentoring relationships who may not have previously had the opportunity. Beyond this, trying to move forward. Okay, so where do we start with measuring effective mentoring? So we start with the end in mind. So this is first and foremost, and again, this has kind of been brought up, I think, by other speakers today, but it's what do you want to achieve with mentoring? Mentoring for mentoring's sake, while nice and has many kind of good feeling principles to it, you want to make sure that you're actually focusing on what are you trying to achieve with mentoring. Because mentoring without any kind of goal or ultimate you know, objective can be nice to have, but it can also be potentially ineffective, or it can kind of be floundering and people feel like, oh, this was great. I had some nice relationships or I had some nice conversations, but what did I really get out of it? I'm not even sure what I was trying to get out of it. So being very specific about what you want to achieve with mentoring is important. And so we think about it through this kind of pyramid here, And basically you have kind of from the top down, you have what do you want to achieve from an organizational outcome and what do you want to achieve from programmatic goals, and how does that work down to programmatic KPIs and metrics that will actually inform all of these things. So you can not only say, here's what we want to get to, but here's where we're starting. And so those are really important to start thinking about when you're thinking about measurement. If you're only looking at program enrollment or program engagement, and you're not ever kind of drawing it out to the organizational outcomes, you could run the risk of either the program not really meeting what the institution wants to meet, and that could lead to a reduction in resources or budget. Stakeholders, lose belief in the program because they can't really see what's actually happening from those mentoring relationships. And so we're going to get into kind of how you work through thinking about those organizational outcomes and goals and KPIs, but some other kind of best practices that I usually include here is, I feel like sometimes it's moving forward and sometimes not. Okay. First and foremost, kind of be specific. Make sure that there is a very specific goal in mind. If you want to increase the student persistence of graduate female students or something like that, make sure that you have something in mind that really identifies the population you're looking to affect and kind of the overall organizational goal you're looking to affect, and making sure that specificity will help you kind of aim and better meet the needs of that group. Identifying benchmarks. I realize that some things that you might be trying to improve upon may not actually have a benchmark, or it just may not be known. Then, you can be the ones to help set up the benchmark for it. But if there is a benchmark, again, for, something like student retention or job placement or graduation rate, you want to identify what currently it is for your institution, your department, your function, and make sure that you're understanding how you would like to increase upon that. So if you want to set a 10% increase or a 15% increase in something, know what you're trying to aim for and what's already in existence. Also set timeframes. Make sure that this isn't a goal that you're just kind of letting flow and going on forever and ever. Set a time frame for when you're, taking the initial benchmark and then measuring the results. If it's a cohort of mentoring that lasts for 9 months or a year, look at that year-over-year measuring. Or that metric that you're looking to impact, and see how it's changed over time. And then also iterate. I think sometimes we get into our heads about, we want to do this and we're going to do this. And and that's kind of the end all be all. But sometimes getting into a program, setting up a program, understanding how a mentoring program is evolving in a culture of an academic institution causes you to think, oh, we were trying to do this, but what we actually care about and what we want to do is this. Iterate as you feel necessary in order to best meet what you're trying to achieve. Don't be stuck on the fact that, oh, we started out here. If you have kind of adjusted the program, or if the needs of the program have changed, make sure you're iterating on your goals in order to best meet that. So let's talk about identifying KPIs. As I kind of mentioned, is looking at this framework, kind of working backwards from what you want to achieve all the way down to your programmatic goals and KPIs. So if you're looking at the organizational goal, who tracks that? What department currently tracks that? Understand where that can be found and how you can kind of go about setting the initial overall goal and benchmark of what that metric is. Another big piece of this is when you're establishing a benchmark, you want to understand that with mentoring, you want to measure of the participants, persistence rate or job placement rate versus non-mentoring participants. And, we know that mentoring is not the end all be all. It's not a causation of people graduating or finding jobs, finding internships, reaching the next level of their careers, but it is something that does impact it. So you want to see, how is this impacting this group that has mentoring access, and how is it impacting a group that doesn't partake in the mentoring access? And then working backwards even from there into the program. So how are people engaging in the program? How are they completing tasks? Are they setting goals? Are they setting milestones? If you're using a software or system to run the program, then a lot of times these things can be kind of automated and replicated within the program so that they're checking things off as they go along. If you're doing it manually, it might have to be done on kind of a survey feedback standpoint, asking people whether they set goals, whether they accomplished goals, how they felt they, progressed on that goal timeline and what that might look like. Going backwards even further, you're looking at matching. Are participants finding the right mentoring match? Are they satisfied with their mentoring connection? Yes, yes, or why not? And then if you're finding that people are not satisfied, how do you make sure that you're building the right mentor pool or mentoring pool to meet the needs of what that population is really looking to get out of a mentoring program? Even all the way back further, enrollment is the intended audience that you're trying to impact enrolling in the program, and if so, what percentage is that? Are they enrolling in the program? Are they creating a profile? Are they finishing a profile? Are they getting matched? All of these things kind of along the way you can kind of use to set your KPIs and metrics that will inform how you're progressing on the way to success with regard to the organizational goal at the very top of your pyramid. Kind of an example of this that I just kind of mocked up was, again, talking about student persistence. If you were looking at the organizational outcome of improving on that rate for mentoring participants versus non, and then how that would look kind of working its way back to programmatic goals, again, relationship completion, goal completion, competencies gains, are they just meeting is there a threshold of minimum participation? Let's say they have to meet 1 hour every month for 6 months. Did they meet that? Did they not? Why not? So these things will kind of tell you like how the program is working and how impactful it's going to be over time. Again, matching, you're looking at match rates, you're looking at satisfaction with mentoring connections, and then all the way back to enrollment as well. So also determining your methods of measurement, very important. You're going to have both quantitative and qualitative, and this kind of breaks down into a variety of buckets. So organizational data, and we've talked about this. This might be, hard data that comes from the institution that you can glean and set your kind of benchmark on and your increasements on. But then you're also looking at mentoring program data. Again, if you're running this on a software or system, then the system might be able to just collect this data for you automatically, and you just run reports that kind of churns it out for you. And so you can see all of this data in a dashboard or something like that. But you want to make sure there's kind of hard data around this. And then participant survey data, this is, pre and post program interaction data that you can kind of say, hey, how do they feel about what they accomplished or the satisfaction with the program? And how does that compare, pre and post and cohort to cohort? So you can kind of see a, cohort improvement or not, depending on how the program goes. But the beauty of mentoring really is that it is a art, not a science most of the time. And so qualitative data is also very important. If you're not able to get kind of the quantitative data, the organizational data from the institution that you need to kind of start measuring those goals and KPIs, you're going to be relying a lot on feedback data. And that's also very important. It can tell you a lot of things, but it is self-reported and it is kind of opinion based on how people felt pre-program, post-program, or mid-program. But it's still very important because this is also where you're going to find out, are people feeling impacted by it? Are there quotes and testimonials that you can pull out from open-ended questions that really give you a sense of how they were impacted by a program? Because the story of how someone might be impacted may not really resonate in the actual quantitative data you're seeing, but you might see a lot more of that kind of effect in those quotes and testimonials. Also, are you getting any kind of recognition, or is there any kind of advocacy around the program within the institution? That's also another big thing. If other people feel that it is important, that also can help bolster, how the impact of the program is seen and viewed both by students and faculty and beyond. So another big thing is you've got the data, now what do you do with it? A lot of times people collect the data and they either say, yay, we did it, or, ooh, there's some areas that we need improvement. And then it's kind of like the data just sits. We know that it's important to establish when to take action. So understanding as someone who's running the program or as a mentoring team, what is a low enrollment rate for you? What's a low match rate? What is a poor satisfaction rate? And at what level or percentage of that feedback would you say, okay, we need to make changes. We need to do this or do that in order to make sure that there is more impact coming out of the program. Because sometimes, the impact is not about the mentoring relationships. It's about the program, how the program has been set up and how it's been sort of orchestrated to interact with the mentors and mentees. So again, taking action to improve the program, you recruit a better mentoring pool. If you're finding that the mentees really want a certain skill set and they're not finding it, how do you better recruit mentors who are going to provide that skill set? If people feel they're kind of adrift in the relationship, how do you better guide them through the relationship? If they don't know how to have certain conversations about topics or give feedback or deliver criticism, how are they being trained in order to do that? So these are all things where maybe various data can tell you where you need to make improvements to the program. And ultimately, you're wanting to eliminate inefficiencies and redundancies. But the biggest piece also, once you have the data, once you have the impact, once you're measuring the effectiveness of mentoring, is tell your story broadly. We've had several customers where they have a really great program going, everyone's loving it. Even the data says, you know, it's making an impact, and yet the only people that know about it are them and the participants. And so sometimes the effect of a program really gets kind of stunted inside the group of people who know about it and doesn't make its way out to kind of incentivize others to become involved, to make sure that the stakeholders in the university or academic institution know that this is actually a valued service from the department. And so unfortunately, it becomes a rah-rah session that stays internal with that group. So yes, ways that you can share the success stories of your program, tap mentoring champions to speak out about the program at events, meetings, etc. Make sure you're spotlighting these mentors and mentees. If you have a mentoring pair that, really thrived in the program, make sure that you're highlighting them. Make them feel special, make their story something relevant that other people can either aspire to or want to be like, and kind of use this to sort of promote the program and recruit more people to be part of the program. A few common measurement challenges, and I'm sure that these are probably apparent to you all and something that you've been in, you've seen before, but basically there's a lot of challenges we find with access to data. So if people that are running a program are trying to access certain organizational data and they are not the people that are actually collecting that data, they're not sure which department collects the data, then they sometimes find themselves, sort of being segmented to just relying on qualitative feedback. So if you can do the planning, if you have access to getting in with people who are collecting the data that you are most interested in, make sure that you're creating that relationship, you're understanding what department might have that, whether it's career services or something else, or an alumni association services within an institution. You want to know who has the data and how can you get access to it? And if you can't get access to it, what is the next best, set of metrics that you can rely on? Kind of in line with that, the decentralized teams. If you're having to rely on multiple teams setting up a mentoring program and there's an IT department you need to get involved with, or there's, like I said, the data is being held or collected in a different department, make sure you're reaching out to that department, not just reaching out, but understanding who is the person that is in charge of that data. How are you setting up a relationship with that person? How often are you able to access said data? In a perfect world, if you're running a mentoring program on a software system, you could set up an SFTP to integrate this, student information through the system. But I know that security and privacy are very important, obviously, in academic institutions. So not everyone is open to that kind of integration. So if that is also a blocker for you, understand that and know how you might work around it. Third and lastly, the alignment on success. So making sure that everyone involved, both the mentoring team, even the participants, as well as the stakeholders or anyone that you're sort of reporting impact to in the academic environment, is aware of what you view as success. Because if there's a disconnect and what you're trying to do is create a 10% improvement on job placement, and the stakeholders or leadership that you're reporting to think it should be 20%, there's going to be a little bit of a wah if you present a 10% improvement and they were hoping for 20. So making sure that you're talking about it and that everyone has agreed to what success looks like. All right, a few examples here, customers we have worked with. So first one here is San Diego State University. They run a program between alumni and professionals and their junior, senior graduate students. And what they're doing is kind of a combination of pre and post surveys for competency, and that's how they're measuring the improvement of the impact of the program that's had on students, as well as kind of this self-reporting organizational goal piece here at the bottom, where they're asking people, did you get an internship? Did you get a full-time job? Did you make alumni connections? And they're having them self-report on those things that they were able to obtain after they went through the mentoring program. And again, this is not necessarily causation. It is just something that adds to the fact that they were able to do this because the connections they made in the program. Another one we work with is Seneca College, and they are doing connecting first-year students with upperclassmen. So they have a large international population, and they are trying to get them more integrated into the college kind of quicker. They actually reach out to them even in the summer before they come on campus in order to kind of make sure that they're feeling that sense of belonging a little bit sooner and inclusion in the university, in the academic institution. And so then another piece that they are really focusing on is how that academic level change is impacting students. So what we're seeing here, and this is a screenshot from the data dashboard in our system for their program, is showcasing that the students who are participants in the mentoring program, 46% are getting a year-over-year academic level change versus 34% who are not involved in an academic or in a mentoring relationship. So they're 12% more likely to have an academic level change than non-participants at this point. And this is actually a data pulled because they do have an SFTP set up with their SIS. And so they're able to bring in some of that student data automatically to the program. And that's been really helpful for them to kind of see this, without all the extra manual work. And then lastly, we run several programs with Harvard University, and one of them is focused on graduate women in STEM. And so this is one where they don't quite have the organizational data all the time. And so they're really focusing on that pre and post survey questions where they say, what was your efficacy in this before the program? What is it after the fact? And what did you feel like you gained most in the course of the mentoring relationship? And so an example of this was what do you feel like you improved upon? 77% felt it was in career planning, with the next two being college to career planning and internships. It's a multiple choice, so obviously this doesn't add up to 100%, but that's just another example. If you don't have access to the full quantitative, you can do this on a self-reporting basis with surveys as well. All right, that was a fire hose of information, and I will sort of wrap this up. If you'd like to connect at any point, LinkedIn, email is up there, as well as if you're in need of any mentoring resources, we have a plethora of resources and best practices on our website. And if you would be interested in anything else regarding Cronus and our mentoring software, you can access our website or email us. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate that. And we will open up the floor for questions. We already have one. If you could stop sharing just so I can see people a little bit either. Appreciate that, Amanda.
Yes.
It may take a while. Okay, so let me get the one from the chat, and then I know Christine's in the queue. I understand why funding, this is from Anna, I understand why funding agencies or administrative units would care about these surveys, assessments of mentoring effectiveness, but how does that type of data help individual mentors and their mentees?
Mm-hmm. I think there's probably a couple different things I would note on this. One is this helps kind of, the data from these types of questions can help kind of the future recruitment of people into this. If they're seeing, hey, mentors and mentees felt improvements on this, or they felt more comfortable after a relationship in these areas, that can kind of say, oh, I want something like that. I'm looking for those type of connections, or I'm looking for those type of skill sets and knowledge and understanding. I want to be involved in that. As far as the individual mentors and mentees, I think there's also a way where if the program participants are feeling that they are not getting those things, if there's almost a decrease, or they're feeling like they're not receiving the kind of knowledge and skill set, then you might find out that you're having really an issue with your mentoring, with your mentor pool specifically. You're not providing people with the right skills where people come out of the program feeling like they've gained anything. And so that might be something else that's kind of illuminating an issue in the program so that you have an understanding of whether or not you have effective mentors in the program who are able to give the kind of development that these students need.
Okay. All right, Christine.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. Actually, my comment is kind of aligned with the last question and what you were just saying. And I'm not speaking as an NSF program officer, but what I'm saying is there are more people in this space. There's more scholarship in this space, and there is a higher expectation of what people are doing and why they're doing it and the impact it's making. So this is something that you all need to be mindful of. And because of that, there are, reviewers who will say, yeah, that's nice that they did that work, but what was the impact? I look at all the stuff that I talked about, all the stuff I did, it was just like amazing, right? However, back then when we were doing that stuff, we didn't have a lot of evaluation and assessment, right? Olga, going on with a lot of the things we were doing. We knew it was making an impact, but people now, if they're going to put money behind it, they want to know what is the impact and can we reproduce it? And if it's not reproducible or if we reproduce it, should we see the same results? And how can we benchmark what success looks like? So it's what my comment was going to be around this concept of it is important. And it may seem like, oh, come on, why are they asking me to do that? I know it's making a difference, but now even more so, and Amanda, you're probably finding it in the clients you're working with, people really want to know because there's a lot more at stake and there are a lot more people doing this work. And so, people have to, excuse me to say, up their game a bit when it comes to evaluation of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Christine. And that is exactly what we're seeing and hearing is that people are following up on what really, beyond your good feelings, what really is the impact of these programs. And right. I think you brought up a great point about scalability is if something is working well for you and your department and the university actually does like it and wants to scale it to something else, or the institution wants to take it to another function, do you have the structure and the kind of rigor in place in order that it really can scale that way? Or is it going to get up there and there's, it's a little loosey-goosey and there's not the guardrails and suddenly you're not able to even scale that impact the same way. And so I think it is really important if you're going to get a kind of viable, scalable strategy.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that's really important. And I will say that for me, I used to work with people in the College of Education, Tueri Bowles, Jessica DeCure-Gunby, who are no longer with the institution. That's a whole nother conversation. But the point is, I miss them. The point is that if you're not ready to do it yourself, align with someone in those fields and realms. Olga and I used to work on that too, or even Amanda. I don't know Amanda. She didn't give me any money to say this, but the bottom line is work with people who can do the work. If you're not an expert, and just focus on what you can do well. Anyway, I got to run because the Disney team players keep coming, looking to see what's going on. So anyway, thank you, Amanda, for your talk.
Thank you.
So there was another question in the chat, and this was Uliana. Do you have measuring assessment templates you can share?
Yeah, we have a couple of kind of guides to measurement, and I could share those. I guess I could find links and put them in the chat, or if there's a better way to share that link, I can do that.
Well, you could put it in the chat, and then is it fair to say that you would be willing to share your slides with the participants?
Yeah. Yeah, I can put some links in there as well for those specifically.
Right. If you could put it in there, that would be perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Other questions out there? I know we're reaching a Friday afternoon, and I appreciate everyone's attendance, and it's getting there. Any other questions? Oh, well, no. All right. Well, let's say hit those reaction buttons and thank Amanda for her presentation. And I'm sure if there is assessments, I know there's assessments going on, that there's a possibility that you might be able to work with Cronus as an opportunity to help develop those. All right, everyone, we've reached the end. And just like airline and pilots who land their planes early at their destination, I'm going to give you some time back, which I know you're all happy to have. That might give me great evaluations at the end. No, I'm just kidding. But the point is, this has been wonderful. I hope you've learned a lot. I know I did. And again, let's thank all of our speakers with clap reactions. This session has been recorded. And so if you've RSVP'd, you'll get a copy. And so to conclude, please take care of yourselves and have a wonderful weekend. Ciao.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so we can